Ironically, the people who know your history best are often the first to decide your future for you. Emily Parker learned that lesson on a cold October evening beneath the golden lights of a crowded family dining room. The Parker family home sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees turning shades of amber and red. Warm light spilled through large windows. Laughter drifted into the night air. Cars filled the driveway. Inside, relatives gathered around long tables covered with polished silverware, crystal glasses, and carefully arranged flowers. Linda Parker's 66th birthday celebration had become the event everyone in the family attended each year. Children played near the staircase. Cousins exchanged stories. Uncles discussed business and sports. On the surface, everything appeared warm and welcoming. Emily stood outside the front door for several seconds before stepping inside. She wore a simple navy dress and a light coat. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to attract attention. She had debated coming at all. The divorce had been finalized nearly 8 months earlier. Since then, family gatherings became uncomfortable territory. Yet when Linda personally invited her, Emily convinced herself perhaps things would be different. Perhaps enough time had passed. Perhaps old wounds had begun healing. The moment she entered, several conversations slowed. Not stopped completely. Just enough for her to notice. A few relatives offered polite smiles. Others looked away. Emily greeted familiar faces and quietly moved toward the dining area. She immediately noticed Ryan standing near the fireplace. Beside him stood Megan Brooks. Young. Elegant. Confident. Megan laughed at something Ryan said and lightly touched his arm. Several family members smiled approvingly at the pair. Emily felt a brief tightening in her chest but quickly pushed the feeling aside. She had promised herself she would remain calm. She was here for one evening. Nothing more. As dinner began, guests settled into their seats. Emily found herself placed near the far end of the table. Across from her sat 2 cousins who spent most of the evening discussing real estate investments. Nearby, an aunt continuously praised Ryan's recent business success. The atmosphere remained pleasant until Linda raised her wine glass for a birthday toast. Conversations faded. Everyone turned toward her. Linda smiled warmly at first. She thanked family members for attending. She spoke about memories, traditions, and gratitude. Then her attention shifted unexpectedly. Family is everything, she said. And sometimes life teaches us difficult lessons about choosing the right people. A few guests exchanged awkward glances. Emily felt her stomach tighten. Linda continued. I am proud of Ryan for moving forward after a difficult chapter. Ryan lowered his eyes modestly while Megan smiled. Not everyone is meant to build something great, Linda added. Some people simply hold others back. Silence spread slowly around the table. Emily stared at her plate. She did not need anyone to explain who Linda meant. The older woman offered a dramatic sigh before lifting her glass again. Thankfully, my son finally found someone who truly supports his future. Several relatives laughed softly. Others nodded in agreement. Emily could feel dozens of eyes avoiding direct contact with her. The humiliation arrived quietly. Not through shouting. Not through confrontation. Through the unmistakable realization that nobody intended to defend her. Ryan remained silent. That hurt most of all. He could have stopped it with a single sentence. Instead, he reached for his wine glass. Megan leaned comfortably beside him. The message was clear. Emily no longer belonged here. The dinner continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Comments became sharper. Questions became more personal. One relative asked whether Emily was still living in her apartment. Another wondered if she had found stable work yet. Someone joked that divorce must be expensive when only one spouse had a successful career. Laughter followed. Emily answered politely when necessary and remained silent the rest of the time. Hours seemed to pass. Finally, as dessert arrived, Linda delivered the final blow. "I always worried Emily depended too much on Ryan," she said casually while cutting her cake. "Some people never learn how to stand on their own." This time several guests openly laughed. Emily looked around the table. Nobody seemed surprised. Nobody objected. In that moment, she understood something painful. They had already decided who she was. The failed wife. The disappointment. The woman left behind. Nothing she said tonight would change their minds. Emily slowly placed her napkin beside her plate. She stood. Conversations quieted immediately. Linda looked up with a satisfied expression. Ryan watched from across the room. For a brief moment, Emily considered defending herself. She considered reminding everyone of the years she spent supporting Ryan's ambitions. The sacrifices. The loyalty. The effort. Instead, she simply smiled. It was not a bitter smile. It was not angry. It was the smile of someone finally understanding that some rooms are too small for the future waiting ahead. "Happy birthday, Linda," Emily said softly. Then she picked up her coat and walked toward the door. Cold autumn air greeted her outside. The sounds of laughter remained trapped behind the house walls as she stepped into the darkness. Her eyes filled briefly with tears she refused to let fall. The driveway stretched ahead beneath scattered leaves glowing beneath streetlights. She reached her car, opened the door, and paused for a moment. Inside the house, they believed they had witnessed the ending of her story. None of them realized they had just witnessed the beginning. The hardest part of losing a life you spent years building is waking up the next morning and realizing the world expects you to continue as if nothing happened. Emily Parker sat alone in her apartment long after midnight, staring through a rain-covered window at the distant city lights. The drive home from Linda's birthday dinner had passed in complete silence. No music. No phone calls. No distractions. Just the steady sound of tires rolling across wet pavement and the weight of words she could not forget. "Some people never learn how to stand on their own." The sentence echoed through her mind again and again. She set a mug of untouched tea on the small coffee table and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. The apartment was modest compared to the house she once shared with Ryan. The living room was smaller. The kitchen barely fit a table for two. The bedroom overlooked a parking lot instead of a landscaped backyard. Yet the apartment was entirely hers. No memories of arguments. No reminders of betrayal. No photographs hanging on walls pretending everything had once been perfect. Emily closed her eyes and allowed herself to remember how everything began. 15 years earlier, Ryan Parker was not the confident businessman everyone admired. He was ambitious but struggling. Determined but uncertain. They met in their 20s when both were building careers and dreaming about futures that felt impossibly distant. Back then, success was not guaranteed for either of them. They shared small apartments, budget dinners, and long conversations about goals. Emily believed in Ryan before anyone else did. She celebrated every promotion. Encouraged every risk. Supported every late night spent building his consulting business. When opportunities required sacrifices, she made them willingly. She postponed professional goals. Turned down offers in other cities. Adjusted her plans to support his. At the time, none of it felt like sacrifice. It felt like partnership. Somewhere along the way, however, the balance changed. Ryan's business grew rapidly. New clients arrived. Revenue increased. Recognition followed. With each success, his world expanded. Emily expected they would grow together. Instead, she slowly found herself standing further and further behind him. The dinners became networking events. The weekends became business trips. Conversations became shorter. Excuses became more frequent. She remembered sitting alone at a restaurant on their anniversary while Ryan called to explain he would be late again. She remembered holidays interrupted by emails and meetings. She remembered telling herself that success required patience. That difficult seasons eventually passed. Then came Megan. Emily never discovered the exact moment the relationship began. Perhaps it happened gradually. Perhaps it happened long before she noticed. What mattered was the result. One afternoon Ryan sat across from her in their kitchen and calmly explained that he was no longer happy. The conversation lasted less than 30 minutes. 15 years reduced to a collection of carefully rehearsed sentences. He wanted something different. He needed space. People change. Emily remembered every word because each one felt strangely empty. Not cruel. Not emotional. Just detached. As though their marriage had become a business contract reaching its expiration date. The divorce moved forward quickly after that. Friends divided themselves quietly. Invitations disappeared. Social circles shifted. People who once praised her loyalty suddenly treated her as a reminder of something uncomfortable. The loneliness surprised her most. Not because she lacked people around her. Because she realized how many relationships existed only through her connection to Ryan. Rain tapped gently against the apartment window. Emily stood and walked toward a small bookshelf near the corner of the room. On the top shelf sat a framed photograph from years earlier. She and Ryan stood on a beach in Oregon smiling into the wind. They looked happy. Hopeful. Certain. Emily studied the image for several moments before turning the frame face down. Not because she hated the memory. Because she could no longer live inside it. She returned to the couch and opened a notebook she rarely used. The first page remained blank. For nearly 10 minutes she stared at it without writing a single word. Finally, she picked up a pen. Her hand trembled slightly. Then she wrote one simple sentence. I will not let this be the end of my story. The words looked small on the page. Almost insignificant. Yet something shifted inside her as she read them. The pain remained. The loneliness remained. The uncertainty remained. But beneath all of it, another feeling quietly appeared. Resolve. Emily closed the notebook and placed it on the table beside her. Outside, rain continued falling across the city. Inside, the apartment remained silent. For the first time in months, however, the silence felt different. Not empty. Not hopeless. Merely unfinished. Somewhere beyond the darkness waiting outside her window, a future still existed. She could not see it yet. She could not imagine it yet. But deep down, she sensed something important. The family who laughed at her believed they had already seen her final chapter. They were wrong. Some transformations happen so quietly that the people who doubted you never notice them until it is far too late. The weeks following Linda's birthday dinner settled into a routine that would have looked painfully ordinary to anyone watching from the outside. Emily Parker woke each morning before sunrise. She brewed coffee in a small machine that rattled loudly whenever it worked. She reviewed job boards, updated professional profiles, and sent messages to former colleagues who might remember her skills. Some days brought polite responses. Many brought silence. The silence used to discourage her. Eventually, she learned to treat it as part of the process. Winter arrived slowly across Portland. Gray clouds lingered over the city. Rain painted the sidewalks nearly every afternoon. Emily spent most mornings at a neighborhood coffee shop 2 blocks from her apartment. The owner knew her by name now. A small corner table near the window became her unofficial office. From there she rebuilt something she had not fully appreciated during her marriage. Her professional identity. Years earlier, before Ryan's business consumed their lives, Emily built a reputation as a strategic operations consultant. She understood systems, processes, growth planning. While Ryan became the public face of success, Emily often worked behind the scenes solving problems nobody else noticed. During the marriage, she gradually stepped away from that world. Clients disappeared. Connections weakened. Opportunities moved elsewhere. Now she began reclaiming them one conversation at a time. One Tuesday morning, an email arrived from a former client she had not spoken with in nearly 7 years. The company faced operational challenges and needed temporary consulting support. The project was modest. The budget was smaller than she hoped. Yet when Emily read the message, a smile appeared across her face. It was not simply work. It was proof. Proof that someone still remembered what she could do. She accepted immediately. The project consumed nearly 6 weeks. Emily reviewed reports, interviewed staff, and analyzed workflows from a desk inside a cramped office building. The work was not glamorous. There were no awards. No public recognition. Yet something important happened. Results followed. Costs decreased. Productivity improved. The client expressed genuine appreciation. More importantly, they recommended her to another company. Then another. By spring, Emily's calendar contained more meetings than empty spaces. Her notebook slowly filled with goals, schedules, and ideas. The same notebook that once held a single sentence now carried plans for an entirely new future. Meanwhile, life inside the Parker family continued as though Emily no longer existed. Social media occasionally revealed photographs from family gatherings. Ryan and Meghan appeared smiling at restaurants, vacations, and networking events. Linda proudly shared updates about her son's growing success. Emily rarely looked at the posts anymore. Not because they stopped existing. Because they stopped mattering. One afternoon, while meeting with a manufacturing company outside the city, Emily sat across from a leadership team struggling with declining performance. For nearly 3 hours she listened carefully, asking questions nobody else seemed interested in asking. By the end of the meeting, the executives appeared noticeably more optimistic. As she gathered her notes, one manager stopped her near the conference room door. "You see things differently," he said. Emily looked surprised. "How so?" The manager smiled. "Most consultants tell us what is wrong. You help us understand what is possible." The comment stayed with her long after she drove home. For years she measured her value through the roles she played for other people. Wife. Supporter. Partner. Now she was beginning to recognize strengths that belonged entirely to her. Summer arrived. The city transformed beneath clear skies and longer days. Emily's consulting work expanded enough that she officially registered her own firm. The paperwork itself felt almost ceremonial. A small business. A simple office space. Nothing extraordinary. Yet when she unlocked the door to her rented office for the first time, emotion caught her unexpectedly. The room contained little more than a desk, 2 chairs, and large windows overlooking a busy street. To someone else it might have seemed insignificant. To Emily, it felt like ownership. Not of a company. Of her future. The months continued passing. New clients arrived through referrals. Revenue improved steadily. Confidence followed naturally. She no longer spent evenings replaying old conversations in her head. She no longer imagined what she should have said at Linda's dinner table. Life ahead demanded more attention than life behind. One evening, nearly a year after the divorce, Emily remained at the office reviewing proposals as the sun disappeared beyond the skyline. Golden light stretched across her desk. Traffic moved below. Her phone vibrated with a notification. Another inquiry from a potential client. She smiled and added it to tomorrow's schedule. Then she looked toward the framed certificate hanging on the wall beside her desk. Emily Parker Consulting Group. The name still felt unfamiliar sometimes. Yet every day it felt more real. Outside, the city lights slowly illuminated the streets below. Inside, Emily closed her notebook and prepared to leave. She did not know it yet, but somewhere across town, a chance meeting was approaching. A conversation that would change everything. A conversation with a man who would see her value long before the rest of the world finally did. Sometimes the most important people enter your life without an introduction, without a warning, and without any idea that they are about to change everything. Nearly 18 months had passed since the night Emily Parker walked away from Linda Parker's birthday dinner. The woman who left that house carrying humiliation and self-doubt now spent her days running a steadily growing consulting firm. The transformation had not happened overnight. It happened through hundreds of early mornings, difficult decisions, and quiet victories nobody celebrated except her. By late summer, Emily's reputation had expanded well beyond the small circle of clients who originally hired her. Referrals arrived regularly. Business leaders recommended her name during meetings. Companies facing operational problems increasingly sought her advice. She was no longer struggling to find work. Instead, she carefully selected which opportunities deserved her attention. One Monday morning, Emily arrived at her office carrying coffee and a stack of reports. Sunlight streamed through the windows overlooking downtown Portland. Her assistant had already organized the day's schedule. 3 client meetings. 2 strategy calls. 1 introductory consultation requested by a company facing significant restructuring challenges. Emily reviewed the notes briefly. The final meeting seemed routine enough. A large investment group had acquired several underperforming businesses and needed outside guidance. The consultation was scheduled for noon. At exactly 12 o'clock, the conference room door opened. Emily looked up from her notes and saw a tall man enter with calm confidence. His appearance was professional without being flashy. Dark suit. Silver hair beginning to appear at the temples. Steady eyes that seemed to notice everything. He extended a hand. Daniel Whitmore. Emily shook it politely. Emily Parker. Neither recognized the significance of the moment. To Emily, he was simply another client. To Daniel, she was simply another consultant. The meeting began. For the first 15 minutes, Daniel explained the challenges facing several companies within his investment portfolio. Revenue problems. Leadership issues. Operational inefficiencies. Emily listened carefully, occasionally taking notes but speaking very little. Daniel noticed something unusual immediately. Most consultants interrupted. Most rushed to offer solutions before understanding the problem. Emily did neither. Instead, she listened. When Daniel finished, she asked a question. Then another. Then another. Within 30 minutes, the discussion moved deeper than any meeting he had experienced with previous advisors. By the end of the consultation, Emily had identified several issues his own leadership team had overlooked entirely. Daniel leaned back in his chair and studied her for a moment. How did you see that? Emily smiled slightly. Most companies focus on symptoms. The real problems usually hide underneath. Daniel laughed softly. That is exactly what my board keeps paying people to tell us. Emily gathered her notes. Sometimes the obvious answer is hidden behind too many expensive opinions. For the first time that afternoon, Daniel smiled broadly. The meeting extended nearly 2 hours longer than scheduled. When it finally ended, Daniel stood near the conference room door. I would like to discuss a larger project. Emily nodded professionally. My office can send available dates. Daniel shook his head. I mean a very large project. The seriousness in his voice caught her attention. Over the following weeks, the project expanded rapidly. Emily found herself working closely with Daniel's executive teams. The companies involved were larger than anything she had managed before. The stakes were higher. The expectations greater. Yet the challenge energized her. Daniel attended many meetings personally. At first their relationship remained entirely professional. Strategy sessions. Financial reviews. Operational planning. Nothing more. Yet as months passed, mutual respect developed naturally. Daniel admired her discipline. Emily appreciated his integrity. Unlike many executives she encountered, Daniel listened. Truly listened. He asked thoughtful questions. He treated employees respectfully regardless of position. Most importantly, he never assumed he was the smartest person in the room. One evening after a particularly long meeting, Daniel and Emily remained in the conference room reviewing final documents while the rest of the team departed. Rain tapped softly against the windows. City lights reflected across the glass. Daniel closed a report and looked toward her. "Can I ask you something personal?" Emily hesitated before nodding. "You can ask." Daniel smiled. "You do not talk much about yourself." Emily laughed quietly. "That is not a question." "Fair point." Daniel leaned back slightly. "What made you start your own company?" For a moment, Emily considered giving a simple answer. Instead, she surprised herself. Losing everything. The room grew quiet. Daniel did not interrupt. He simply waited. Emily stared at the city lights beyond the window. "After my divorce, I realized I had spent years helping someone else build a future while forgetting to build my own." Daniel nodded slowly. No sympathy. No pity. Just understanding. "That must have been difficult." Emily smiled faintly. "It was necessary." Daniel looked at her for several seconds before speaking again. "For what it is worth, I think they underestimated you." The comment was simple. Honest. Yet it lingered in Emily's thoughts long after the meeting ended. As she walked through the parking garage later that evening, she realized something unusual. Daniel Whitmore was the first person in years who saw her exactly as she was. Not as Ryan's former wife. Not as someone recovering from failure. Not as a cautionary story. Simply as Emily. She drove home beneath the glow of city lights, unaware that this professional partnership was slowly becoming something far more important. And somewhere ahead, a future she never expected was beginning to take shape. Success rarely announces itself with a single dramatic moment. More often, it arrives quietly through a series of opportunities that seem small until someone looks back and realizes everything has changed. For Emily Parker, the months following her partnership with Daniel Whitmore became the most transformative period of her life. The consulting projects continued expanding. One successful restructuring led to another. One recommendation opened the door to 3 more. Companies that once would never have returned her phone calls now requested meetings weeks in advance. Her schedule filled with strategy sessions, executive briefings, and corporate presentations. Yet despite the growing workload, Emily felt something she had not experienced in years. Energy. Not the exhausting pressure she remembered from the final years of her marriage. This was different. Every challenge seemed connected to a purpose she had chosen herself. One bright spring morning, Emily stood near the windows of a manufacturing facility she had spent 6 months helping transform. Production numbers had improved dramatically. Employee retention had increased. Revenue projections exceeded expectations. As she prepared to leave after a final review meeting, the company president walked her toward the parking lot. "You know," he said, shaking his head with a smile, "when we hired you, half our board thought we were taking a risk." Emily laughed softly. "And now?" "Now they are asking if you are available for their other companies." The comment stayed with her during the drive back to Portland. Moments like that mattered because they reflected something deeper than professional success. Respect. The kind earned rather than granted. Meanwhile, Daniel remained a constant presence throughout her expanding business world. Their meetings continued regularly, though the conversations increasingly extended beyond quarterly reports and operational forecasts. Sometimes they discussed leadership. Sometimes books. Occasionally life itself. One evening after a conference outside Seattle, a delayed flight left them waiting in a quiet airport lounge. Rain tapped against enormous windows while travelers moved through the terminal. Daniel sat across from her reviewing notes from the conference. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. Emily looked up from her laptop. "Of course." Daniel closed the folder in front of him. "You are different from most people I meet." Emily smiled. "Different how?" "Most people become successful and immediately start talking about themselves." He paused briefly. "You became successful and started asking how you could help other people succeed too." Emily considered the observation. "Maybe because I remember what it felt like when nobody believed in me." Daniel nodded slowly. "That is exactly what I mean." The conversation ended there, but something important settled between them. Mutual respect had grown into genuine trust. Neither rushed it. Neither forced it. The connection developed naturally, built on shared values rather than grand declarations. Summer arrived, bringing longer days and new opportunities. Emily's consulting firm moved into a larger office overlooking the Willamette River. She hired additional staff. Expanded services. Accepted partnerships she once would have considered impossible. The business was no longer surviving. It was thriving. Industry publications occasionally mentioned her work. Local business organizations invited her to speak at events. During one leadership conference, she stepped onto a stage before hundreds of executives and discussed organizational growth strategies. As applause filled the room afterward, Emily experienced a strange realization. Not long ago, she struggled to believe in her own future. Now complete strangers valued her perspective. Across town, life inside the Parker family continued moving forward as well. Ryan's relationship with Megan appeared increasingly public. Social gatherings. Business functions. Weekend trips. Linda proudly shared photographs and updates whenever possible. Yet beneath the surface, subtle changes were beginning. Business conditions became more competitive. Growth slowed. New challenges emerged. Nothing catastrophic. Simply the reality that success required constant adaptation. Emily knew none of this. She no longer monitored Ryan's life. She was too busy living her own. One afternoon, Daniel invited her to join him at a charity fundraising event supporting educational programs throughout Oregon. Emily initially hesitated. Large social events still carried complicated memories. Ballrooms reminded her of old wounds. Public gatherings reminded her of uncomfortable questions. Daniel seemed to understand immediately. "There is no pressure," he said. "I simply thought you might enjoy the evening." Emily smiled. "You make it sound very casual." Daniel laughed. "It is not casual at all. I am just trying not to scare you away." The honesty made her laugh for the first time all day. She agreed to attend. The event itself exceeded expectations. Elegant but relaxed. Meaningful rather than performative. Throughout the evening, Emily noticed something unusual. People knew Daniel everywhere they went. Executives greeted him. Community leaders sought conversations. Investors requested introductions. Yet he treated everyone with the same courtesy regardless of status. Near the end of the evening, a board member approached Emily privately. "You know who he is, right?" Emily looked confused. "Daniel?" The woman smiled. "Daniel Whitmore owns half the companies represented in this room." Emily blinked. "I knew he was successful." The board member laughed softly. "That is one way to describe it." The conversation lingered in Emily's mind during the drive home. Daniel had never mentioned wealth. Never discussed influence. Never used status as an introduction. For him, those things seemed secondary. Yet the realization remained impossible to ignore. The man who believed in her when nobody else did was far more powerful than she ever imagined. As city lights reflected across the windshield, Emily felt a quiet sense of anticipation she could not fully explain. Life was changing again. And somewhere ahead, another invitation was already making its way toward her. An invitation from the very family who once laughed while she walked away alone. The past has a strange way of returning when it believes you have finally forgotten it. Nearly 3 years had passed since Emily Parker left Linda Parker's birthday dinner and drove home believing her life had collapsed beyond repair. In those years, everything changed. Her consulting company expanded into a respected strategic advisory firm. Her client list included organizations she once could not have imagined working with. Industry leaders sought her expertise. Invitations arrived regularly for conferences, executive events, and leadership forums. Yet despite the success, Emily rarely spoke about where her journey began. The past no longer controlled her, but neither had she erased it. One crisp September morning, Emily arrived at her office to find a cream-colored envelope resting on her desk. There was no company logo. No business letterhead. Only her name written neatly across the front. She opened it casually, expecting another event invitation. The moment she unfolded the card, her expression changed. Ryan Parker and Megan Brooks request the pleasure of your presence at their engagement celebration. The date was 6 weeks away. The location immediately caught her attention. Linda Parker's home. Emily stared at the invitation for several seconds. Then she laughed softly, almost in disbelief. After years of silence, after years of pretending she no longer existed, suddenly they wanted her there. She did not need to guess whose idea it was. Linda had always enjoyed an audience. The engagement party would be filled with relatives, family friends, and business associates. It would be the perfect opportunity to display Ryan and Megan's happiness while quietly reminding everyone that Emily had been left behind. The old version of herself might have declined immediately. The woman she had become simply placed the invitation on her desk and returned to work. That evening, however, the card remained on her mind. Not because it hurt. Because it fascinated her. Why now? Why after all this time? Several days later, during a strategy meeting with Daniel Whitmore, the invitation surfaced again in conversation. They had just completed a successful acquisition review and were discussing upcoming schedules when Daniel noticed the envelope sitting beside a stack of documents. "Interesting expression," he said. Emily looked up. "What expression?" "The one people make when they are trying to decide whether something is amusing or annoying." Emily laughed. "Maybe both." Daniel nodded toward the envelope. "Bad news?" "Not exactly." She handed him the invitation. Daniel read it quietly. One eyebrow lifted slightly. "Your former husband." "And his fiancée." Daniel handed the card back. "Are you going?" Emily leaned back in her chair. "I have been asking myself that all week." Daniel studied her for a moment. "Do you want to go?" The question surprised her. Everyone else would have asked whether she should go. Daniel asked what she wanted. Emily considered it carefully. "I think I do." "Then go." "It is not that simple." Daniel smiled. "It usually is." Emily shook her head. "You do not know this family." "No," Daniel's expression remained calm. "But I know you." The conversation lingered in her thoughts long after the meeting ended. That night she walked along the waterfront near her apartment as evening lights reflected across the river. The air felt cool. Boats drifted slowly through the water. She thought about the family gathering years earlier. The laughter. The judgment. The certainty that she had become a failure in their eyes. Strangely, the memory no longer caused pain. It felt distant now, like a chapter from another person's life. Several days later, Emily made her decision. She would attend. Not because she needed validation. Not because she wanted revenge. Simply because she refused to organize her life around avoiding uncomfortable people. When she informed Daniel during lunch the following week, he nodded approvingly. Good. Emily smiled. You seem very confident about this. I am. Why? Daniel set down his coffee cup. Because the strongest version of someone never hides from rooms they used to fear. Emily looked away briefly, absorbing the words. Then another thought occurred to her. There is one problem. Daniel waited. Everyone there expects me to arrive alone. A subtle smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. That sounds like their problem. Emily laughed. The answer came so naturally that neither of them immediately acknowledged its deeper meaning. Weeks passed. The engagement party approached. Meanwhile, Emily's professional success continued accelerating. Several business publications featured her work. Interviews appeared online. Conference invitations increased. Her reputation spread steadily throughout executive circles. Yet none of that mattered to the Parker family. As far as they knew, Emily remained exactly who they remembered. The former wife. The failed marriage. The forgotten chapter. They had no idea what her life looked like now. One afternoon, less than a week before the engagement celebration, Daniel visited her office carrying documents for an upcoming project. As the meeting ended, he paused near the doorway. What time is the party? Emily looked up. Saturday evening. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Good. Why? His expression remained calm. Because I would like to attend with you. The room fell silent. Emily blinked once, uncertain she heard correctly. Daniel's face revealed nothing except quiet sincerity. Outside the office windows, the city continued moving through another ordinary afternoon. Inside, however, something important had just changed. And for the first time since receiving the invitation, Emily realized the engagement party might become far more memorable than anyone expected. The people who expect to witness your embarrassment are often the least prepared for your confidence. Saturday evening arrived beneath a clear autumn sky. Warm light spilled across the quiet neighborhood as guests began arriving at Linda Parker's home. Luxury vehicles lined both sides of the street. Laughter drifted through open doors. Music played softly inside. The engagement celebration had become exactly what Linda envisioned. Family members mingled with business associates. Friends of Ryan and Meghan filled the rooms. Crystal glasses reflected the glow of chandeliers overhead. Every detail had been carefully arranged to showcase a future everyone wanted to celebrate. Inside the living room, Ryan stood near the fireplace greeting guests while Meghan accepted compliments on her engagement ring. Linda moved through the crowd with obvious satisfaction. She enjoyed hosting events like this. More importantly, she enjoyed controlling the narrative. Tonight's narrative was simple. Ryan had moved on. Meghan represented a bright future. The difficult chapter called Emily Parker belonged firmly in the past. Several relatives discussed whether Emily might actually attend. Most assumed she would decline. Others hoped she would appear out of curiosity. Linda smiled each time the topic surfaced. If she comes, she said casually, I hope she is doing well. The words sounded polite. The tone suggested something else entirely. Nearly an hour after the party began, the front door opened. Conversation near the entrance softened. Heads turned instinctively. Emily Parker stepped inside. For a brief moment, the room seemed unsure how to react. She wore an elegant dark green dress that reflected understated confidence rather than extravagance. Her posture was relaxed. Her smile was calm. Nothing about her appearance suggested someone arriving to prove a point. Yet the difference was impossible to ignore. The woman standing in the doorway looked nothing like the person who had quietly left Linda's birthday dinner years earlier. Emily greeted several relatives politely and accepted a glass of sparkling water from a server. Across the room, Ryan noticed her immediately. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Surprise first. Then curiosity. Megan followed his gaze. She actually came, she whispered. Linda approached with practiced warmth. Emily, she said, extending both hands. What a surprise. Emily smiled. Thank you for inviting me. Linda looked around the room before lowering her voice slightly. I am glad you could join us. The statement sounded welcoming. Yet Emily recognized the familiar performance beneath it. Years ago, she would have felt intimidated. Tonight, she simply nodded. As the evening continued, relatives gradually approached. Some offered genuine greetings. Others disguised curiosity as conversation. Questions arrived one after another. Were you still consulting? Did you stay in Portland? Had business been keeping you busy? Emily answered politely but briefly. She no longer felt any need to justify her life. Across the room, several family members whispered among themselves. One cousin remarked that Emily looked surprisingly confident. Another wondered whether she was seeing anyone. Someone else mentioned hearing her name connected to business conferences recently. The uncertainty bothered them. People preferred simple stories. Emily's life no longer fit the version they created. Later in the evening, Ryan finally approached. For several seconds neither spoke. The years between them felt strangely distant. You look well, Ryan said. Emily smiled. Thank you. He nodded. I hear business is going well. It has been a good few years. Ryan glanced around the room. I am glad. The conversation remained polite. Controlled. Yet beneath the surface, Ryan seemed unsettled. Not because Emily appeared angry. Because she appeared completely at peace. There was no bitterness in her voice. No resentment. No visible regret. She spoke to him the same way she might speak to any acquaintance at a networking event. The realization left him unexpectedly uncomfortable. Nearby, Linda observed the interaction carefully. She had expected awkwardness. Perhaps sadness. Instead, Emily appeared entirely unaffected by the evening's purpose. As dinner began, guests moved toward long tables arranged throughout the main dining area. Emily found herself seated among distant relatives and family friends. Several conversations eventually drifted toward success, careers, and relationships. One guest asked whether she attended many business events these days. Emily answered honestly. Quite a few. Another person smiled. Then you must know some interesting people. Before Emily could respond, Linda laughed softly from across the table. Well, Portland is a small world. I am sure everyone eventually meets everyone. A few guests chuckled politely. The familiar tone returned. The subtle suggestion that Emily's accomplishments could not possibly compare to those of the people Linda admired. Years earlier, the remark might have wounded her. Tonight it barely registered. Emily simply smiled and continued eating. The confidence irritated Linda more than any argument could have. As dessert approached, conversations filled the room once again. The celebration appeared to be unfolding exactly as expected. Ryan and Megan stood together near the center of the crowd accepting congratulations. Linda glowed with satisfaction. Family members laughed and exchanged stories. Then, just as another toast was about to begin, movement near the front entrance drew attention. The door opened quietly. A tall man stepped inside. Several guests recognized him immediately. Their expressions changed before a single word was spoken. Conversation stopped. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Heads turned throughout the room. Near the dining table, Emily looked toward the entrance and felt a small smile appear. Daniel Whitmore had arrived. And within seconds, the atmosphere inside the entire house began to change. Recognition is a powerful thing. It can silence a room faster than any speech ever could. The moment Daniel Whitmore stepped through the front door, conversations throughout Linda Parker's house slowed to a stop. Some guests recognized him instantly. Others needed only a few seconds before realization spread across their faces. Daniel was not merely successful. He was one of the most respected business leaders on the West Coast. His investment group owned companies across multiple industries. His name appeared regularly in financial publications. Universities invited him to speak. Charities sought his support. For many people standing in that room, meeting Daniel Whitmore would have been the highlight of the entire evening. Yet Daniel seemed completely unaware of the reaction he created. He removed his coat, thanked the hostess who accepted it, and calmly scanned the room. His eyes immediately found Emily. A warm smile appeared across his face. Then he walked directly toward her. Guests instinctively stepped aside as he crossed the room. Linda watched in confusion. Ryan stared silently. Megan looked from Daniel to Emily and back again, trying to understand what she was seeing. When Daniel reached Emily, he greeted her with the comfortable familiarity of someone who genuinely enjoyed her company. "I hope I am not late," he said. Emily smiled. "Only fashionably." Daniel laughed softly. The simple exchange carried more weight than either of them realized. It revealed something the room had not expected. This was not a casual acquaintance. This was not a chance encounter. These two people clearly knew one another well. Nearby, whispers spread quickly through the crowd. Several business professionals attending the engagement celebration exchanged surprised glances. One executive quietly asked another whether that was truly Daniel Whitmore. The answer came immediately. Yes. Absolutely. Linda recovered first. Years of social hosting had taught her how to manage unexpected situations. She approached Daniel with a polished smile. "Mr. Whitmore," she said warmly. "What an honor." Daniel shook her hand politely. "Thank you for having me." Linda glanced toward Emily. "I had no idea you knew one another." Daniel looked at Emily before answering. "We have worked together for quite some time." The statement was technically true. Yet it revealed almost nothing. Linda smiled uncertainly. Something about the exchange felt different than she expected. She could not identify exactly what. Across the room, Ryan continued watching silently. He remembered hearing Daniel's name before. Business articles. Industry conferences. Investment news. The realization unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. During the next hour, the atmosphere inside the house changed completely. Guests who previously overlooked Emily now sought conversations with her. People asked questions about projects, conferences, and business initiatives. Executives who knew Daniel immediately assumed anyone earning his respect must possess significant accomplishments of her own. Emily noticed the shift but refused to exploit it. She remained exactly as she had been earlier in the evening. Polite. Calm. Unimpressed by sudden attention. That consistency fascinated Daniel even more. Many people changed when status entered a room. Emily never did. At one point, a senior executive approached Daniel near the dining area. "I did not realize you and Emily Parker were connected," he said. Daniel smiled. "Emily is one of the best strategic minds I have worked with." The executive looked genuinely surprised. "That highly?" Daniel nodded without hesitation. "Higher." Unfortunately for Ryan, he happened to overhear every word. The comment struck him harder than he expected. For years, he viewed Emily through the narrow lens of their marriage. He remembered the supportive wife, the patient partner, the person who stood behind his ambitions. Somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing the talent that existed independently from him. Now one of the most successful businessmen in the country openly praised abilities Ryan himself had overlooked. Later in the evening, a guest finally asked the question everyone seemed to be wondering. "Emily, how exactly did you and Daniel meet?" The surrounding conversation quieted. Several people leaned slightly closer. Emily smiled. "Through work." The guest laughed. "That sounds like a short version." Daniel answered before she could continue. "The longer version is that I hired her because I needed help solving problems. Then she solved problems nobody else even noticed." Several people laughed. Yet nobody missed the admiration in his voice. Linda stood nearby listening carefully. The evening she planned so meticulously was no longer unfolding according to her expectations. Emily was supposed to feel uncomfortable. Instead, she appeared completely at ease. Emily was supposed to be the forgotten former wife. Instead, influential people kept approaching her throughout the evening. Most confusing of all, Daniel seemed genuinely proud to stand beside her. As the celebration moved toward its final hours, Ryan found himself alone near the back patio watching guests interact through the glass doors. He saw Daniel and Emily speaking quietly near the fireplace. Neither appeared interested in impressing anyone. Neither seemed focused on the attention surrounding them. They simply looked happy. For reasons he could not fully explain, that realization lingered painfully. Not because Emily arrived with a wealthy man. Because she arrived as someone entirely different from the woman he remembered. Across the room, Linda noticed the same thing. The confidence. The peace. The self-respect. None of it came from Daniel's presence. It existed before he entered the house. Daniel merely revealed it to everyone else. And as the evening continued, one truth became impossible for anyone to ignore. The woman they once dismissed as a failure had quietly built a life more extraordinary than any of them ever imagined. The greatest victories rarely look like victories in the moment. They look like peace. The engagement celebration continued around them, but the energy inside the house had shifted permanently. Guests still smiled and exchanged conversations. Music still played softly in the background. Glasses still clinked together during toasts. Yet an invisible line had been crossed. The story everyone believed about Emily Parker no longer existed. Standing beside Daniel Whitmore, she did not appear triumphant. She did not appear interested in proving anyone wrong. Instead, she seemed remarkably comfortable in her own life. That quiet confidence unsettled people far more than anger ever could. As the evening drew closer to its end, small groups of guests gathered throughout the house discussing business, investments, and future opportunities. More than once, Emily noticed people looking toward her before lowering their voices. Years earlier, those same people had looked at her with pity. Tonight, their expressions carried something entirely different. Respect. Near the back patio, Ryan stood alone watching lights shimmer across the garden. The celebration that was supposed to be about his future somehow felt strangely distant. He heard footsteps approaching and turned to find Emily standing nearby. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The cool evening air carried the scent of autumn leaves. Finally, Ryan smiled faintly. "I never expected any of this." Emily looked toward the garden. "Life surprises all of us." Ryan nodded slowly. "You seem happy." The words sounded sincere. Perhaps for the first time in years. Emily considered the question carefully. "I am." Ryan looked down for a moment before speaking again. "I underestimated you." Emily felt no satisfaction hearing it. No sense of revenge. Only acceptance. "Maybe," she said gently. "But I underestimated myself too." Ryan laughed quietly at the honesty of the answer. Then he shook his head. I spent a long time thinking success was about getting everything I wanted. Emily glanced toward him. And now? Ryan stared through the patio doors where guests continued celebrating. Now I think it might be about appreciating what you already had. The conversation ended there. No dramatic confrontation. No emotional speeches. Just two people acknowledging truths that arrived years too late. Inside the house, Linda Parker watched from across the room. Age and experience had taught her how to read people. She could see immediately that Ryan was carrying a weight she could not remove for him. For the first time that evening, Linda found herself studying Emily not as a former daughter-in-law but as a woman. A woman who had endured humiliation without becoming bitter. A woman who had rebuilt her life without demanding recognition. A woman who no longer needed anyone's approval. The realization left Linda unexpectedly quiet. Later, as guests began collecting coats and saying their goodbyes, Daniel found Emily near the front entrance. "Ready?" he asked. Emily smiled. "Very." Before leaving, she approached Linda. The older woman seemed surprised. For several seconds they simply looked at one another. Then Emily offered a sincere smile. "Congratulations to Ryan and Megan. I hope they have a wonderful future." Linda blinked, almost caught off guard by the kindness. "Thank you, Emily." The response came softer than expected. Emily nodded politely and turned toward the door. No accusations. No reminders of the past. No attempt to settle old scores. She left behind the very thing everyone assumed she came to reclaim. Validation. Outside, the night air felt cool and refreshing. Stars glimmered faintly above the quiet neighborhood. Daniel walked beside her toward the waiting car. For several moments neither spoke. Finally, Daniel smiled. "You handled that remarkably well." Emily laughed softly. "I did absolutely nothing." "Exactly," Daniel replied. As they reached the car, Emily paused and looked back toward the house one final time. Warm light still glowed through the windows. Shadows moved behind curtains. Laughter drifted faintly into the night. Years ago, leaving that house had felt like losing everything. Tonight, leaving felt entirely different. She was not walking away from rejection. She was walking away from a version of herself that no longer existed. Daniel opened the passenger door and waited. Emily smiled before stepping inside. As the car pulled away from the curb, the Parker home slowly disappeared behind them. The road ahead stretched beneath rows of streetlights leading toward the city skyline in the distance. For the first time in many years, Emily felt no need to look back. The family who once called her a failure had witnessed the truth with their own eyes. Not because she arrived with a billionaire beside her. Not because she built a successful company. Not because the world finally recognized her value. They witnessed it because she had learned something far more important. Her worth had never depended on their opinion in the first place. And as the city lights grew brighter ahead, Emily smiled quietly to herself. She did not win Ryan back. She did not defeat anyone. She simply found the person she was always meant to become.